Mute. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, so good morning. Welcome to this webinar hosted by Women in the Built Environment, Bowiko, today. So sorry, someone just interrupted at the door, as always happens on these online meetings. Welcome today. It's really nice to see that we have so many interested participants for today's session. I'm going to ask our presenters for this morning to briefly introduce themselves to you, and then we'll get started with our presentations and discussions. We've allowed 2 hours for this morning's session. Each of our presenters today will speak briefly to their topic. We'll have a question and answer session, and hopefully the 2 hours that we've allocated for this session will at least be enough to start some invigorating discussions around this very pertinent issue that we are all facing. So I will start by asking Kgafela to introduce herself. You need to unmute your mic.
Unmute my mic. Okay. Technology. It's actually not muted. I think you need to do it on your end. It's not muted.
You are on, Gorata. Just go ahead.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Gorata Kgafela, Managing Director of GBK Architects, as well as President of the Architect Association of Botswana. It's a very interesting morning for all of us to be participating in this webinar. I hope that we come out of this having learned so much, not only today's seminar, but come out of this COVID-19 having learned so much about how to make ourselves more resilient going forward. Okay.
Kelly?
Oh, am I next? Sorry. Good morning, everyone from lockdown. I'm Kewagamang. I'm the managing partner of a law firm called Kewagamang Legal. It's a corporate commercial law firm. We structure deals in the built environment. We negotiate contracts. We draft them, we review them, and we enforce them. So I shall be speaking to you about a key element of contracts that's been a buzzword with the advent of Corona. I hope it will be a meaningful discussion, and I'm very excited to interact with everyone.
How can you introduce yourself to our listeners this morning?
Good morning. My name is Gaonyatsege Kwakwa. I work for QED Consulting Engineers as a director and head of mechanical engineering division. I'm also the chairperson of the Association of Consulting Engineers Botswana, and I'm very excited to participate in this webinar meeting. I'm also excited to be able to interact with all of you. I hope to have a very good 2 hours this morning when I can see showers outside my house. It's raining here, and thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Mayor Proctor, if you can introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers.
Thank you, Sita. I'm Kedibonye Proctor. I'm a quantity surveyor by profession. Currently, I work as a registrar at the Quantity Surveyors Registration Council. So today, it's an exciting day for us as women in the built environment, just to share our views in terms of the current lockdown and the current situation, which is the COVID-19. And basically our views on where we see the construction industry going post the lockdown. So we are excited. I'm excited to be here to listen to all speakers and also to the views and questions from the other people who will be viewing this webinar. So I hope it's going to be an interactive and very exciting session for all of us. Thanks, Sita.
Thank you, Gidi. Chanda?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Chanda Masendu-Kusane, the Managing Director of Minnacle Group, which comprises Minnacle Academy, a training institute, which is focused on the built environment, training practitioners in the built environment. So be on the lookout for us in the next few years. We're going to bring lots of changes in this market. And also Minnacle Properties, which is a property services company. We do property valuations, property sales, property development, property. That's our business. And I'm here today to present on real estate contracts. And I'm looking forward to meeting all of you. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
It's always a terrible thing to assume that people that are listening know who you are. So I will introduce myself properly. I am Sithabile Mathe. I'm a practicing architect at Moralo Designs. I'm also the chairperson of the Architects Registration Council. I'm chairman, would you believe it, of the Botswana Housing Corporation. I'm a committee member at the Architects Association of Botswana as the treasurer. I'm a former council member at the Commonwealth Association of Architects. So like all the women who are here with you today, we are all extremely passionate about our various roles within the built environment. And today's, the desire to sort of come together and discuss what we are faced with COVID-19. We're very, very impressed so far about some of the initiatives that our government has put in place. But like all disasters, one can never say one was completely ready. One saw it coming, you know. So we find ourselves in quite a distressing, concerning situation that the anxiety and concerns that everybody across our society feels and are, you know, as the built environment, we are not protected from those either. So today's session is about constructively facing this challenge and using this as an excellent opportunity to reflect on how are we going to be prepared should this ever, you know, God forbid, should this ever happen again? And what are the learnings that we see from this event? As practicing professionals, we in our various fields within the built environment, as you see, the women here today come from a variety of professional backgrounds that are all key professions within the built environment. So today's session will hopefully bring us that diversity in terms of you as our listeners having an appreciation of the various aspects across the profession that have been impacted by this by the COVID-19. We often like to look at pandemics like this as only a disaster and that the response must only be a disaster response. One of the key things that I think we as a group of panelists have spoken about is the fact that this is not only necessarily a disaster, it is perhaps also an opportunity for reflection, for growth, and for new ideas that will drive our industry forward. So without taking up too much time, I'm going to ask our first speaker, Mayor Gorata Kgafela, to speak. She will be opening up with a broad view of risk management, because this pandemic has opened the fact that we are all at risk, and particularly within the built environment, there is a broad spectrum of risk that we face, and how do we mitigate against this risk? What is the risk? And like all risk mitigation efforts, how does one ensure that one in the future is in a better position to face that risk? Kgafela, over to you. Thank you.
I'll just switch. Okay, thank you very much, Sita. I'd like to now just switch on to my presentation, which, as you have mentioned, touches on managing risk during this time as well as going forward. So let me just work with technology here. Help me out and let me know if indeed my screen is showing. Oh. Okay. Is my screen showing? Okay. All right. As I mentioned earlier, my purpose for today is basically to talk about risk management and how COVID-19 pandemic has basically gotten us where we are, and how we move forward as a people, as a profession, to just ensure that in the future we're able to avoid any issues that might affect our businesses, that might affect us as persons and as government, and to be better prepared. I'm trying to forward my screen here. I don't know why it's not working. Okay, all right, there we go. I believe that's my second slide. So as I mentioned, the effects of COVID-19 and a different way of doing business post-COVID-19 in Botswana, with an emphasis on risk management and contracting. So I just wanted to lay it out to you in terms of how I'm going to go about the presentation. So the first thing I'll talk about is the background and introduction to the topic that we're speaking to today, how it applies to us. I'm going to talk about the project development cycle, just so that we have quite a number of viewers. I understand we probably have hit 100 by now in terms of our viewership. So I don't know who is watching, to what extent you understand the construction industry, but this is to give you an idea of what goes on when we are talking about developing a project. And then survey findings from the AAB. The AAB, which is the Architects Association of Botswana, has recently undertaken a survey just to try and understand how our members are doing and how this is affecting them. So operating within what we refer to as a VUCA environment. I will again elaborate a bit more on what VUCA is. And then going forward to speak to managing risk during and post-COVID-19 pandemic. And then as we want to come out of here with what lessons have we learned and where are we going from here. The global village, as we all know, is currently grappling with the present and the impending effects of the shutdown on economies, which has been brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic. Sita mentioned earlier that we somehow maybe were prepared. But as a country, I would want to say that we are fortunate enough to have been amongst the last to actually get affected by COVID-19 here at home. Our numbers are still small. However, we are feeling the ripple effects of this shutdown. We are feeling the ripple effects of issues of health that the rest of the world has been feeling, and it is important for us to learn, again, to use this as a learning curve, how other countries have looked at it and how they have reacted to it. One thing that I find very comforting is the fact that during this time, really humanity has shown itself to be very resilient in the face of uncertainty. Yeah, it's a first for our time. We've never gone through anything like this. We have generations that have gone through wars. But for us, this is the first time, and I must say that we have been resilient. We have taken up technology like never before. You know, things that you always ignored. All of a sudden, you are just thrust into this environment where you have to adapt as a people. We have to adapt as businesses. And I must also say that if in the past, few weeks, in the past few months, if you haven't been living in the virtual world, I don't know how you have been surviving. Because basically, we have all found our places in different communities through social media, and exactly dealing with that thing, that human instinct of socialization and association. We have found our niches, we have found our places. And then going forward, the spirit of sharing. I mean, it's amazing how as soon as this started, everybody around the world started sharing free resources. Government started looking at how do we resuscitate businesses? How do we make sure people have food at their homes? And it has brought us to see that indeed our individual needs are intertwined. And as I must highlight that our successes
Did we lose Gorata? I think we might have. Well, whilst we wait for Gorata to come back online, I'll ask our next speaker, Mekhao, to maybe start with her presentation, and then we'll give Kgafela an opportunity to come back and continue with her presentation as well. Kwakwa, can I ask you to briefly talk about your issues at this moment whilst we wait for Kgafela to come back online?
Thank you, Sita. As we already discussed earlier on, I'll be looking on ongoing projects, effect of COVID-19 on ongoing projects, paying particular attention to the supply chain of on-site projects and dependency of supply beyond Botswana borders. I'll also be discussing issues on how does the construction industry overcome this dependency and capacitate itself to recover post-COVID-19. Due to COVID-19 pandemic, most countries entered into a lockdown, as was seen fit by governments and in collaboration with WHO. Enforcement of lockdown order varied across jurisdictions and involved including decisions on ongoing projects and maintenance projects. In most cases, there were no activities on site. Countries approached it differently. For instance, in New York, you'd have revised definition of essential services to include construction projects that are already underway. UK allowed construction sites to operate with the requirement to implement site operating procedures. According to the FIDIC webinar report, countries like Spain decided that construction industry to be one of the first to return back to work. So basically, there were varied issues with regards to how people wanted to implement their lockdown. In Botswana, enforcement of lockdown was done, and it started last month. It's beginning of this month. In most cases, companies made arrangements for people to work from home, like Kgafela has already stated, and that was applicable to people with the facilities to support that decision. And some companies went an extra mile to provide their staff with their facilities to work from home during the lockdown. This was to ensure minimum disruption to ongoing projects. That is, there are some phases of an ongoing project which could still be implemented despite the fact that people are working from remotely. Certain stages could be achieved, like the initiation stage of a project cycle, or the pre-bidding stages could also be implemented. The planning stages through to design stages could also be implemented, and thanks to the technology that we had, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to have implemented the stages. This could be confirmed by realities, however, because we don't know what other people are doing, and maybe some people are on holiday or to be with their families at this time. However, on the other hand, construction sites, or the reality of the situation is that construction sites were closed, but still other activities were supposed to be done remotely. There are other activities which could still be done, like equipment submissions, approvals of equipment, that is between consultants and contractors, and equipment orders and shop drawings. However, disruption of work on site was inevitable as the execution and implementation stage is on hold. That is, there was no one who is allowed to go to any of the site. That is our situation here in Botswana. Despite all what I've said, all contracting parties, even today, as we speak, we have responsibilities in accordance with the contract. FIDIC commends all members of the construction community to particularly keep in mind that they, that is FIDIC, promote cooperation and trust between contracting parties. FIDIC does not support any party taking undue advantage of its bargaining power, even during this period. And they also discourages adversarial attitude and encourage dispute avoidance. It's very important. And they also encourage timely and adequate payment in accordance with the contracts to maintain cash flow. So the contracts are still running as we speak. So the above issues will be possible, however, if the procurement system is robust and if the contracting parties understand their responsibilities in accordance with the contract. Where we are having procuring system, which is by default gravitates towards the lowest bidders, we will always have challenges promoting cooperation. We will experience a scenario where parties are taking advantage of anything, including the current pandemic, and which will be very unfortunate. As I said earlier, contracting parties should commit, should show commitment, they should understand the contract, and they should take their responsibilities to minimize disputes. I mean, it will be unfortunate to have our courts full of people because of the dispute as a result of the COVID-19. On the other hand, we're having issues of material in Botswana, which is now talking to the supply chain processes of how we procure our materials in Botswana. We all know that for every project, each and every project, especially mechanical equipment, it's project specific. And then we don't have people having stockpiled materials somewhere. Each and every project, each and every space, it has to be allocated equipment as per the requirement of that space. So basically, the dependency is largely on the materials that can be obtained for the project to go on. And most of the materials are ordered. In fact, most of the material, mechanical equipment in particular, and other materials for construction, they are ordered outside the borders of Botswana, outside the borders of Africa. Some of them are even obtained in Europe. So, however, on the projects, they largely depend on the supervising team. If I go back to the project, and contractors and suppliers for their delivery on time to the client. So the basis of our work is on the understanding that the contractors are resourced to supply all materials required to complete the project, and that they have adequate staff to complete the project within the project period. The supervising team must be resourced well as well to carry out their spot checks on regular basis and confirmation of material on site for payment. They are brought locked down by countries beginning of the year due to the COVID-19, would mean material reproduction for the construction industry is drastically interrupted. This is because currently millions of people across the globe are in lockdown, some in strict quarantine and still others in partial quarantine. As a country, we have very little commodities manufactured locally, including materials used for construction projects. It is therefore inevitable that serious shortage of materials for both new and maintenance projects will be realized when the situation normalizes and sites are opened. Are you saying something, Sita? No.
I
am. Okay. Indications are that companies in some countries overseas, especially in China, are experiencing real shortage of staff returning to work when they lifted the lockdown. The implication could be that a manufacturing company in Europe may not complete production of their orders because they are waiting delivery of some parts from China, while they are equally struggling with their own resources. That will affect the delivery of, did you cut me?
No, keep going, Khao, if you just round off and then we can go back to Kgafela before we speak to issues of contracts.
Yeah. As I was saying, somebody has placed an order for a particular part in China, which is going to complete their equipment in Europe. This will affect delivery of such an equipment in Botswana. So basically, as we all know, the complexities of the supply chain in construction project is a reality. So let me stop here. I'll continue after Kgafela completes her.
So yeah, we definitely see, I mean, this, when it comes to materials, as you say, to supply chains related to, and in particularly very, very technical elements. So, you know, yes, bricks and mortar, we are able to produce here locally, but anything that's more complicated or more complex that's going into our buildings, we definitely recognize that vulnerability in our industry. I'll ask Kgafela now to go back to her presentation, and you know, you'll keep in mind that we've already spoken a little bit about supply chain and the vulnerabilities that have come out of supply chain, and then we'll come back to issues of contracts, because our relationship as parties in the built environment is guided by the contracts that we have in place. Kgafela.
Again, as we say, we are in a period of uncertainties, and we need to be able to deal with them as and when they come up. So I took an early coffee break to go and deal with my electricity issue. But thank you for having me back on. I don't know if my screen is okay on your end. Is my screen okay on your end? Okay.
Yes.
Because I have a message in the middle of my screen, but I hope, okay, it's clearing. So let me just run back a bit to where I was. I was talking about the fact that, you know, staying at home now has given us an opportunity to rethink and basically to reformat our lives and redirect the course of our lives, so to speak, but to find new ways of existing. And then the fact that new opportunities are presenting themselves, we need to be more positive about how we come out of this. We need to rethink how we build our environments now, how we build our cities. It's still relevant the way our cities are functioning. And of course as well, how governments themselves work and how they react to issues pertaining to you know, public welfare, economic welfare of the country, and impacts on policy as well. My colleagues will touch on, as they have already started, on other matters that will be affecting us going forward. So here now I have what is referred to as the project development cycle. Again, I hope my screen is better that side. I don't know what is happening. I have a message on my screen. Please just give me a moment. Let me try and get rid of this. Okay, I'm just going to pretend all is well. But speaking to the project development cycle is for us to, as I said, to give a background to how a project actually happens. We first of all, obviously, dream, think, see what is needed around us. That is part of the planning process. Finding financing for a project, for it to become a reality, we've got to think about how is it going to be financed. Procuring services, for example, in the P space of transaction advisors, and again, as part of conceiving of a project, that is the planning phase. The implementation phase now includes design. Design is where you now start calling consultants such as ourselves, architects, engineers, quantity surveyors, doing condition surveys as well of existing buildings as part of that implementation of a project. And then procurement of contractors, construction to take place. And then going forward, we've got operations. Once the facility has been built now, it's about managing the facility going forward, ensuring that it is functioning for what it was meant to be, maintaining it, and so forth. So this is the project development cycle. And what I'd like to now share is basically how within our constrained environment, this project development cycle is affected. How COVID-19, for example, the fact that we're all locked down and sitting at home, how is this project development cycle affected? If you look at the green basically means it's a go. Red, stop. You can't do anything. So planning can take place. Implementation to a certain extent can take place. It can take place in the fact that design, for example, can continue to take place. Condition surveys of unoccupied buildings could take place should perhaps there be relaxation of the lockdown conditions. And then matters of facilities management become quite constricted in terms of actually the interaction, the social distancing. It means that some of those things cannot take place. Now zoning into the project implementation cycle is the different stages of work delivery. Once now it has been planned and is going to take place, we go into inception, which is the first stage of a project. Concept design is when the concept now is being, the designers are coming up with the concept, and then design development, which is once you have more feedback and a better understanding of what the project wants to be, is to develop it and then document it technically to allow you to then go for procurement, get your contractor to start building, going into stage 5, which is construction, and then stage 6 close out. Now when the facility is ready to be taken over and to be used for what it was meant for. Again, let us now see the effect of a constrained environment within the project design cycle. Stages 1, 2, and 3, which are your design stages, your documentation to an extent. Inception, those are services that can be done even during a lockdown. And that is why we have emphasized that, you know, we've had to work from home. It doesn't mean that we're on holiday. If you've got a project that is within those stages, you're actually able to work and manage your teams from home. However, we've seen that when it now comes to procurement, to stage 4, the final technical documentation, perhaps even the application for building permits, that has been constricted. It's absolutely not taking place. We cannot procure contractors for any projects that might have been sitting on our tables before we close down. And then construction, absolutely, it's a no-go area. We all know it's not taking place. No project can be completed at this stage or declared completed at stage 6 because of social distancing, because of the lockdown. So that is how the constraint environment has actually affected the work stages. It teaches us something. It teaches us what is possible now within the stage that we are sitting in. And then I want to give you a picture of projects now and the future. Again, this is informed by the AAB survey, which was taken during this month of April after the lockdown. What we are seeing with the reality of projects, existing projects, for example, we can see that possibly about 75% of projects are delayed. I would even say not just delayed, but they are at a standstill. About 80% or over 85% in total. Nothing is happening with projects. And looking at prospective projects, our respondents were asked to just give an estimation of how the projects that perhaps they had started talking about with clients or that they were expecting to be appointed for, what has happened. Again, we see that there's very slow progress in any prospective projects whatsoever. And if you include the fact that some of them are cancelled, we are saying we are looking at an uncertain future. We don't know what is happening. Not knowing what is happening takes us now to the concept of VUCA. I mentioned this term earlier. It is a term that is used in business. It helps us to measure and understand our environment, whether it's an industry, a market, or the world in general. And the terms of VUCA are volatility. So volatility refers us to the speed of change in an industry, in the market or in the world in general. The more volatile an industry is, the faster it is changing. And therefore you need to be catching up. You know, things change quickly. Today it's this, tomorrow it's something else. So it's a volatile market, it's a volatile industry, or the economy as well. And then looking at uncertainty. The U is for uncertainty, which refers to the extent to which one can confidently predict the future. And you can only say you could predict to an extent if you are certain about an outcome. And the more uncertain it is, the harder it is for us to predict. And obviously we're seeing ourselves in a situation where things are changing every day. We don't know whether the lockdown is going to be extended by a week, by 2 weeks, and therefore it's difficult for us to even say what is our next step. Complexity, the number of factors that we have to take into account when we are trying to analyze an environment. The more factors there are, and construction is one of those industries, it's very complex. And therefore, we were talking earlier, you were talking about importation of materials. Those are factors that we have to take into account from different countries, multiple countries. Some countries might open up exports, some might close down, but that is the complexity we're talking about. And then ambiguity refers to the lack of clarity about how we interpret something. The more ambiguous the world is, when we don't say what it is that we are trying to do. Government maybe not coming out to say, this is what, to lay out, or to play their cards open in totality, instead of addressing one issue at a time. So things are ambiguous. We don't know what the meaning of the world is. So how does this apply to the construction industry right now? I would like to speak to you to the images that you see on the left-hand side of my screen. We are seeing that staff are working from home. A bulk amount of staff are working from home. And the truth also is that firms are overall expecting revenue losses in the coming year. This takes us to the volatility that we mentioned earlier, which is the sudden change of workplace arrangement. A lot of us had to shut down. We arrived at the office in the morning and it was, we need to leave. At the end of today, we need to be out, take away anything that we are going to need while we're working from home, regardless of whether we had been preparing for it or not, but we didn't have the exact date of when the shutdown was going to happen. And then projects need to be delivered at lightning speed. We've seen around the world how, hospitals, makeshift hospitals have had to happen to take care of the situation right away, to deal with the current situation. And going forward as well, we're going to expect that we have to deal with matters of health and safety, be it in our schools, in our hospitals, in our workplaces. And this has to happen in lightning speed to ensure that it is not hampering progress as we go forward.
Kgafela, I'm going to ask that we come back to you, because I think the second part of what you're going to be talking about in your presentation is talking a little bit more about how do we come out of this. Thank you very much for setting the setting as you have. I'm going to take us to Mayor Kedibonye, who's going to look at this issue together with Mekidi. Maybe if I start with you, Mekidi, the impact of contracts, you know, because all of this is sort of driven and guided by our formal agreements as parties in this space. So Mekidi, Proctor, I'll ask you to talk about, you know, this issue with respect to contracts, and then we can go back to some of the solutions that we need to start thinking about. Kidi?
Thank you, Sita. I will talk about managing contracts, and because Kelly is coming in after me, so she'll get into details, more details about some of the stuff that I won't really cover. She will cover that. What did I do? Oh, sorry. My screen just went blank. Yes, so as you know, as quantity surveyors are responsible for managing contracts, especially within the built environment. So the aspect of managing contracts falls with the quantity surveyors mainly. So I'm basically just going to touch on the mishandling of contracts and its effects. What we need to understand is that, you know, we all know that, especially contractors, what they tend to do is you get the contract, you don't really get to look at the clauses and what's included in the contract. All you're interested in is the BOQ, the specifications and the drawings to basically make sure that you deliver on your work, forgetting that you have other contractual obligations which will be stated in the contract. So it is very important to understand the type of contract that you are entering into. So we shouldn't just take it for granted that, you know, since you've been working in the construction industry, you know the construction industry by heart. So you basically know everything. So we need to always make sure that we know the type of contract that we are entering into. It's not about signing a contract and keeping it in the drawer and only to remember it when there is a dispute or when there are issues on site. That's when you remember, oh, by the way, I need to refer to the contract. So, you know, and the lockdown actually gives us that opportunity to go through our contracts, to check the legal implications of the lockdown, including the obligations of all parties. So if you look at, you know, we have so many different forms of contracts that are being used in the Botswana construction industry or Botswana built environment. So in there, you'll find that you have the general conditions of contract together with the particular conditions of contract. So in terms of the general conditions of contract, here it's basically the standard conditions. This will be based on the form of contract that you are entering into. It may be a FIDI contract, a JBCC, BIDP, etc. Like I said, there are so many different forms of contract. And you'll find that over and above that, there is the particular conditions, which are basically special conditions which will be relevant to that particular contract. So you'll find that the variations and to the standard conditions will be captured under the particular conditions. So it does not necessarily mean, for example, if you know FIDIC, you've attended so many FIDIC courses, automatically you know what will be included in that contract. Because some of the employers, they do change some of the clauses, and these are mainly captured under the particular conditions. So that is why at the beginning I said it's very important to understand, to go through your contract so that you understand exactly what it is that you are entering into. So understanding contracts post the COVID-19, some of the clauses that we really need to pay attention to are, one is the force majeure. This is the clause that everybody's talking about, but the next speaker is going to explain it in detail, what it is and its implications, because we have a lot of different experts interpreting this clause differently. So you need to go back to your contract and see what this clause means in terms of the project or the contract that you have. But this is one clause that, you know, going forward, we are going to see a lot of changes, especially around drafting this particular clause in the contract. So we know that some contracts don't even have this particular clause. So then you need to also now refer back to what other contracts that are included, what other clauses that are included in your contract, what they mean, what can be used, especially during this time of the lockdown. In terms of notices, like I said, Kelly will cover in detail what force majeure is, the implications, its applications and all that. I'm not going to get into that detail. And then also, you know, it's in terms of contracts, we have notices, and most of these are time barred. This can be notices of delay, notices of claims. So you need to go back to the contract and see what is it that you are expected to do. When for example, as a contractor, what are your obligations during the lockdown? Both Kwakwa and Kgafela, they touched on this. It does not necessarily mean that you have to be sitting at home doing absolutely nothing. There are some items or obligations that you have to do as part of the contract. For example, you know, we all know that we don't know when everything is going to go back to normal. It might take 2 months or 3 months or 6 months, but it does not necessarily mean that, you know, because everybody knows that there was a lockdown, it means everybody knows what the implications are. You know, you have, as a contractor, you have to go back to your contract, look at it. What is it that you're supposed to do in terms of notices? Because most of these are time barred. So if you don't do it within a certain period, then it will not, it may not hold at the end of the day. And then obviously, then, you know, the other clause that you also need to look at is suspension. Because as it is now, most of the contracts are suspended because of the lockdown. And then, you know, FIDI gives 84 days suspension, saying, it says after 84 days, both parties may have the right to terminate the contract. So these are the things that you need to understand, that it may happen at the end of the day. FIDI gives 84 days, JBCC gives 90 days. So which is like 3 months. So obviously after 3 months, what happens to your contract? You need to at least have an idea of what might happen. Then we have subcontractors. Obviously, we know we have subcontractors on site. Usually, these are covered by the main contractors agreement. But as a subcontractor, it does not necessarily mean that, you know, because you work under the main contractor, you don't have any obligations. You also still have obligations. So it's important for you to go back to your contract and make sure that you understand what it is. Because, you know, still under obligations as contractors, what during the lockdown, your obligations may include making sure that you still secure the site, you still ensure that materials on site are safe, the works is still protected. It does not mean that we all fold our arms and go home and say, you know what, it's a lockdown, there isn't really anything that we can do. You know, I think Kgafela also touched on consultants doing part of the works. Kwakwa also touched on it, because it does not mean that some of the works can't go ahead. You know, for quantity surveyors, if you have, before the lockdown, you were given detailed drawings, obviously it does not stop you from going ahead and producing bills of quantities and other reports that are required. And also, you know, when you look at all this that's happening, it does not necessarily mean that the extension of time for everything is going to be automatic, because the lockdown does not mean everything comes to a standstill. There are certain aspects and certain obligations that one can still do during the lockdown. And then in terms of
Edie, I'm going to interrupt you a bit, just so that we also give me an opportunity to come into some of these in a little bit more details. The questions are rolling in on our screen in terms of what people are curious about. So I see that there's going to be a lot of lively action in the question and answer session. So I'd like to maybe leave some of our comments to that part. Can you zoom in on what has been eating all the built environment WhatsApp groups in the last month? Give some clarity on the issues that we're facing, and then we can all collectively come back to a discussion, to some commentary about, you know, what do we do in the future? What do we do differently? But let me just give you an opportunity to hone into some of these as the hotline is starting. Oh, we need you to unmute your mic.
Thank you, Sita. As has already been presented, Corona has really put a spanner, you know, in the construction works, literally. And insofar as legal issues are concerned, insofar as contracts are concerned, it has brought into sharp focus more than ever before, you know, in modern society, the concept of force majeure in contracts. This concept in English basically means acts of God. And most contracts in the built environment encompass this concept, especially the standard forms of contract. Because the law of contract gives parties the freedom to contract as they see fit, you would find that this concept is regulated differently and defined differently from contract to contract. However, there are similar features across all contracts that basically define this feature of force majeure. It basically means events that occur that could not be foreseen by the party that's affected, that are beyond the control of such a party, that occur without fault on such a party, and events that you know, could not be avoided by such a party. So these are the common features that you would find in most contracts in their definition of this force majeure concept. Contracts also go then to classify events that would be subsumed under this concept, and some contracts are exhaustive in the sense that you know, the list is limited to those events that are defined, and then some contracts are more inclusive and give space for wider application of the concept, in that they won't necessarily specify the events, but you know, from a reading of the contract, you'd see that you know, with similar events, you can bring them under that classification. I don't think the question whether COVID-19 is a force majeure concept, especially in Botswana with the lockdown, really still exists. I think we can all agree that with the lockdown and seeing that construction is not an essential service, that clause has to be invoked. And parties have to look at the provisions in their contract for consequences that are brought about by a force majeure. In some contracts, you find that force majeure suspends the operation of the contract, depending on what the parties have set out. That suspension, as Kidi mentioned earlier, might come with timelines, and might also come with a duty to give notice. And some of those notices, like she mentioned, are time barred. So counterparties, contracting parties have to be aware. You have to look at your contract and see what impact COVID has had on it and what you need to do. If it suspends the contract, does your contract say you have to give notice to the other party that there's been a force majeure event and the timelines that are necessary for such notices? It might bring some contracts to an end. So you also have to look at your contract and see whether COVID-19 has the impact of terminating your contract. So in general, parties define force majeure differently and provide for triggers and logistics around force majeure differently. So a party has to review their contract, and if it's a force majeure event, see what you need to do to ensure that you don't fall foul of your contractual provisions. And then beyond that, where we are, parties have to also look at other provisions of the contract. For instance, you will find that there are practical issues like what we say, or what we call domicilium. This is where we provide for the manner in which you give notices. Look at your contract and see whether the domicilium allows you to give notice of the force majeure event in the right manner. If your contract doesn't provide for automated ways of giving notice, you have to reach out to the other party and see and update your domicilium, and also just discuss the entire contract to see whether you can renegotiate some parts of the contract, looking at the practical effect, which is going to differ from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Look at, for instance, issues of if it's suspension or extension of time, look at your particular circumstances and see if the time provided is enough for you. Say, for instance, lockdown is for 3 months, and your suspension can only go for 30 days. Look at those provisions and see whether it's practical to let the contract get to a stage where you have to terminate. So basically what I'm trying to say is that even in the legal space, COVID-19 has brought uncertainties. We are going to be breaking a lot of new ground, and parties are advised not to be rigid, with their reading and interpretation of the contracts. Around the world, what is encouraged is collaboration between the parties, so that between the two of them, they can navigate COVID-19 and come up with practical solutions that would ensure that the impact is not catastrophic on their contract. But this is if where force majeure is concerned, this is if force majeure is basically part of your contract. What happens to contracts where force majeure hasn't been made a provision of that contract? What you look at, and in all instances, you have to read the contract as a whole. You would find that contracts would provide for what we call a choice of law clause. And if the choice of law is the law of Botswana, for instance, Botswana is what we call a common law jurisdiction. So if the choice of law is Botswana, you find that the common law then kicks in, and brings in other legal concepts that apply even if they are not specified in the contract. Common law is basically the customs of a jurisdiction and, judicial precedents that come from that jurisdiction. We've been fortunate enough in Botswana to have our highest court in the land, being the Court of Appeal, deal with this concept of the common law concept of force majeure, which we call supervening impossibility of performance. In the BMC case, that concerned the cattle lung disease in Ngamiland. This cattle lung disease in Ngamiland a few years ago brought a halt to the beef production industry. Abattoirs were closed, workers were laid off, and the workers took the employer in BMC to court, basically complaining that BMC had breached the employment contract because the workers had been sent home, they had been put on forced leave, and so forth. So the court, looking at that situation, looking at the fact that the abattoir BMC was closed because government had issued a directive that it be closed, the court then looked at our common law and came to the conclusion that this was the closure of the abattoir was basically brought into operation our common law on impossibility of performance, because BMC, without any fault of its own, was forced to close the abattoir. Therefore, meaning that it was possible for BMC to perform the contract. I'm about to wrap it up. So basically, we have the force majeure concept under our common law. So if it's not provided for in your contract, you would find that if it means it's impossible for you to perform the contract, you are then discharged from liability. However, for as far as the impact of COVID-19 goes on your contract. So you also have to evaluate how far you've been impacted. Some industries in the built environment, like design, as has been mentioned, are able to go on to a limited extent. So when you assess force majeure, when you assess how far you can perform, you have to basically suspend your performance in proportion to the impact that force majeure has had on your duties. Let me stop it at this stage.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have the most difficult job because the group of women that I'm sitting with presenting this morning all sit with an immense amount of wealth of knowledge within the different areas that they work in. So I find myself in a position needing to remind those that are listening that in essence, I think today's session is starting to reveal itself more as an introduction to the issues and the issues that need to be discussed, and without letting the cat out of the bag, to say that I think there does need to be further, much more detailed engagements about many of these subjects. The questions are coming in, and I would like to use, I'm going to pick a series of questions and direct them to one of our panelists to respond to those particular questions together, because I think they speak to certain issues. But I think before we do that, there is a question, let me just find it. This question is an excellent opportunity to introduce Chanda's presentation, because I think her contribution, we've talked a lot about construction sites, about contracts on, on site, the impact on buildings that are ongoing. But the built environment is not just about buildings. There is a huge sector of our society which is impacted, and that's the real estate sector. So there's a question that says, which sectors of the commercial real estate, if any, standing to gain from COVID-19 disruption, and which will be hit? I won't ask Chanda to answer that, straight away, but I think within the real estate sector, when you listen to her presentation, the response to that question will become apparent. So Chanda, over to you, and we'll come back to the other questions directed at the other panelists. Thank you. You need to unmute your mic.
Thank you. I'm just going to be sharing a screen. So I'm putting my screen on now. Share. Good morning. I think I can proceed. I'm Chanda, like I said, from the Real Estate Fraternity. I'm also when I introduced myself, I didn't state this. I'm also the Secretary General of the Real Estate Institute of Botswana. So I'm going to be talking about a different contract to what the other panelists are talking to. They're talking to more the construction contracts. I'll be talking to the leasing contract, which is right at the tail end. If you're looking at Kgafela's presentation, you will realize that there's a whole chain and a whole series. So right at the end, now talking to, well, it's at the beginning and at the end, because usually the process is that before any building should go up, there should be reason that there will be occupancy. So the leasing process starts at the beginning, but it really takes into effect at the end. And that's what I'm going to be talking to. Now, talking about a lease, really what makes a lease a lease? There are three, what we call the essentialia of a lease, essential items of a lease, without which a lease does not exist. And really, which, if fully satisfied, a lease is concluded. So a lease doesn't have to be 100 pages. If these three are satisfied, you've got your lease. You have to have an undertaking to deliver the property, an agreement that you use the property temporarily and enjoy it and derive fruits from it temporarily. So basically, a lease into perpetuity is not a lease. The third one is that, and which is the most important one, and the one I'm going to be talking to, is that there should be an undertaking by the lessee to pay rent. Okay. This is not moving. Now, in terms of payment of rent, which is a very critical thing where even COVID-19 is impacted, is a very, very important one. Now, with payment of rent, so as I mentioned, there are three rights to a tenant. It's pay or responsibilities. You have to pay rent, 2, proper use of leased properties, and then the third one, the return of the property in the state that you got in at the end of the lease. So really, when we're talking about leases, there's a common phrase here in Botswana which says, "Undipendi kupe." When you're talking about leases, you're talking about, I'll give you my space, you give me money. And unfortunately, and we're going to be talking to this, does COVID-19 take away this responsibility? I've given you my space, pay me my rent. The main core of leasing comprises rental payment by a tenant in exchange for temporary use and enjoyment of the landlord's property. Any failure by a tenant to pay rental is a breach. As I mentioned, rental is one of the key 3 things at the beginning of leasing. Now, the most important clause which we are going to be talking to, which is the force majeure clause. A lot of leases in this country do not have that clause. And this is a learning that perhaps we're going to walk out of as we walk out of COVID-19. So what does force majeure talk to? Okay. So force majeure talks to, is a clause which excuses a party's non-performance when unforeseen circumstances outside the party's control prevent it from meeting its obligations. I'm not sure if there's background noise here. Depending on the specific language of the lease, events like pandemics, epidemics, contagious diseases, government acts, and orders and civil emergencies may qualify. However, there's a lot to prove to show that these things are really result or affect the force majeure clause. Difficult market conditions, financial difficulty, or events that could or should have been anticipated usually do not. Okay, let me just move this from my screen. And as I mentioned, the general Botswana country trend has been for leases to omit force majeure clause altogether. It's not common. I've studied a couple of leases across a lot of property management companies. It's very rare to find a force majeure clause. Even when where you find it, it really does not exclude the rental payment in the event that such an event happens. And as I mentioned, the onus would be on the party relying on the clause to really prove that COVID-19 falls within the contract wording. So there's a lot of work in terms of proving that. Now, in the absence of force majeure, as is common right now in Botswana, landlords and property owners, a lot of us here are property owners to one extent or the other, must brace themselves for, lots of excuses that are going to be coming up for non-performance, including failure to pay rent, impossibility to perform, commercial impracticality, frustration of purpose. And while these defenses may be fact-specific in the case of COVID-19, they generally require the tenant to prove that there is a non-performance, and it's quite a lengthy process. So at the end, and Sita, what I'm going to be talking to, I'm not sure if I should talk to that now, is the recommendation on now seeing that we don't have force majeure in our clauses or in our contracts, in our leases. What do we recommend to be happening between landlords and tenants at this particular point as we're faced with COVID-19? So I'm not sure if
I'm quite happy for you to go on to that aspect. A lot of the questions that are coming up, both in the Q&A and in the chat, are referring to that. So let's quickly cover that, and then we can go back to some of the other issues that have been raised through the chat.
Okay, all right. So can you terminate? So let's say we go back and COVID-19, we see that it's impacted a lot of us, financially, economically, our businesses. Some of the businesses have been, and we hope not, have been rendered ineffective, i.e. they have to close or not. And as I'm saying, we really hope not. Now, can you terminate? Can you just walk in and terminate? Kidi brought up a very important factor earlier on contracting. And a lot of the time we really don't, myself included, I'm a property practitioner, but where I am, the lease that I've signed does not have an exit clause. And these are some of the things that we do at times, or some of the situations that we find ourselves in. So can you just walk out? No. Can you just pack your things? No. There's set ways of terminating a lease. It has to be fulfilled. There has to be a mutual agreement. There has to be a set-off of some sort. Even if you die, unfortunately, because of COVID-19, and you've got a 5-year lease, you've got a 5-year lease and it's still running, unfortunately, the lease will not terminate because of death. So these are some of the things that we need to look out for in the future, to know that there can be situations like now COVID-19, which can put us at high risk, and how do we protect our finances? Now, in the interim, now going back in the next 23 days, as we had the president yesterday, the most important thing, these are the recommended measures. I've got 6 here. Communicate with your landlord to reach an agreement of some sort. As I mentioned, rental really is the basis of your existence. The landlord has put you there for rental. Without the rental, he's hit economically, he or she is hit economically in the pocket. 2, from a real estate perspective, the way we measure value of property is based on income, especially for the income generating properties, is based on income. So your values are really a factor of your income, your net income, and the capitalization rate. So it's not expected. We don't foresee situations where rentals will be reduced, because the rentals, the moment you reduce your rentals, it impacts the values of properties. And this impacts a whole lot of other things that I'm not going to be talking to today. So because we're not likely to see rentals reducing, because we have not heard of a moratorium on rental payment by government, these are the recommendations. Communicate with your landlord to reach an agreement that if I don't pay on time, if I don't pay in full, let's say I pay partially, or in some of the retail leases, you'll find that there's a clause there that states that you have to operate X amount of time, hours rather, X amount of days, because a mall has to be running and it has to look in a certain way. Talk to the landlord about some of these things. Maybe you cannot afford to have your employees in the workplace for a period of time. Ensure that these things are communicated so that you are not in breach of contract, and you may find yourself on the wrong side of the law. Propose alternative measures such as moratorium or reduction in rental. You may talk to that, maybe I cannot pay for now, maybe I'll pay in the next, give me a month a break and etc. And sometimes, depending on the fact that you've been a good tenant, you've maintained a good relationship, or you're a critical tenant whom the landlord would like to have there, he will listen, he or she will listen. Talk to things like adding your area rental to the end of the lease. This is something that happens sometimes in banking, where when somebody buys a vehicle, the amount a certain portion of the amount is ballooned or postponed to be paid at the end, where it's called a balloon payment. You can talk to that. Say, for example, I've not been able to pay March rental, April rental, and May rental, and it comes to 70,000. Perhaps talk to the landlord that maybe balloon that payment to March next year or to another time. Discuss these things. So at this point, because we do not have the benefit of a government statutory document, which says there's a moratorium on rental payment, we don't have the benefit of landlords likely to reduce the rental. It's about conversation. Now, as I move on, negotiate, for rentals to, yes, it's the last slide.
Yeah, I'm just going to ask you to wrap up quickly so we can move on to some of the chat questions.
Okay, the last three. Continue paying other things. Your lease, there's the base rental, there's the operating costs and other factors. Talk to, pay a portion of what you're supposed to pay, and do not let your arrears accumulate. Because as I'm mentioning, and you can hear the emphasis, I'm emphasizing that there's the likelihood of your rental falling away is so little that pay something, get into negotiations and discussions. One of the most important ones at the top, let me talk to it last. Perhaps even talk about a turnover rental. This is something that now you can even go to your landlord and say, let's talk about turnover. If I'm going to be making X amount of time, let me pay you a percentage of it instead of me having a base rental, because I'm not sure about how my business is going to be performing. Sita, I'll stop here for now. I think we'll talk more during Q&A.
Yeah, so thank you for that presentation, Chanda, speaking specifically to the real estate industry, which, especially commercial real estate related to retail at the moment has really been hit very hard by this COVID-19 pandemic. But, one of the things that we've discussed at great length is, okay, we are in this situation. We find ourselves in this situation. It has revealed a whole mountain of issues to us as an industry. We see what was working and we see what is not working in this kind of situation. I've been very disappointed by, comments where you get a sense that people are like, well, it's locked down, we're home, we can't do anything. I find that a very disturbing, personally, I find that a very disturbing attitude. So from my panelists, I've tried to say, is this really such a bad thing? Yes, it is. For some people, it is a bad thing. But what is the silver lining in this cloud? What are the opportunities? What is it that we now need to use this time what opportunities do we see that this time has revealed for us? I'm going to go to Tume Hao to I mean, you raised the whole issue about supply chain. So for us as a country going forward, what is it that we need to do? And we'll then from Mecha, we'll go to Kgafela to speak to some of these. What are the opportunities? What does the future need to look like? 2-3 minutes just on that subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was going to discuss complexities that I experienced in the supply chain in construction projects, because this complexity is attributed to the variety of site materials, like we said, and parties, suppliers and subcontractors required for the construction project. The project can become more complex as more people are coming on board. Like when you look at the other side, when you look at the project cycle, more people come right at the end as contractors and suppliers come on board. So this requires a great deal of planning and organization and collaboration between supply chain partners, which may cause the complexity. And then a large construction company may interact with hundreds of thousands of suppliers and subcontractors as per year in order to deliver a project. So basically, this would include planning for any disruption, including issues at hand, that is issues of COVID-19. So dependency of supply beyond Botswana borders, we are looking at issues right now whereby building material from other countries would start those countries are also on lockdown. And as such, we are going to experience bottlenecks. Mind you, in Botswana, we are a small economy and with about 2 million people. And as such, I can imagine the way we place orders or even the partnerships that we have with the suppliers abroad is probably not as other countries like big economies like America or even China or even the European countries. So basically the bottlenecks are going to be there in terms of how material is going to be delivered to the project, especially for those who have not placed orders at this time, and then those who are still going to place orders. I earlier on indicated that the suppliers currently are also, or manufacturers are also experiencing problems with their manufacturing because of the COVID-19, because of the manpower who are on lockdown and unable to go to work. So basically, it's important when I come to issues of how to overcome some of these things. Even the way we do business in Botswana, where here in Botswana, we are in a situation whereby the fluctuation in the construction industry, sometimes we are up, sometimes there are many projects, sometimes there are not many projects, and that is a problem to those who are at the other side, those stakeholders or those contractors who are linking with the suppliers, because you find that they may not be able to make relationships like other people. So they may not be priority. I mean, I'm talking about the ones who are in Botswana in particular, because look at the way things were happening between 2010, was it 2010 up to maybe 2015? There was literally nothing in the construction industry. And that kind of exposes the people who are in link with the suppliers, especially those who are outside the country. So, Madam Chair, I'll quickly go to how does the construction industry overcome this dependency and capacitate itself to recover post-COVID-19. We need to perform a supply chain audit within the industry to understand how much exposure we have as a country. That is in terms of construction industry. It's very important. Unfortunately, right now, we just found ourselves in a situation which we never did. And it was revealing a lot of things like you have just said. We also, through our partners, those who are involved in the project cycle, we need to identify alternative to suppliers, because people are partnering with suppliers outside the country to move quickly to assess even issues of cost, to change suppliers and ability to alternative to meet your demands. And then it is also important for us to plan for the next supply chain disruption by building a resilient supply chain. I mean, all stakeholders, we are involved in a way in what we get from a project. That is the procuring entity, the design team, through to the contractor and the suppliers. We are all involved in this thing. So we need to find a way of making a resilient supply chain. We need to go from reaction to anticipation to collaboration and even to orchestration as quickly as possible and as effectively as possible, as effectively as we can. So basically, those are the things that we need to look at and try to close the loops in. We have to also look at the way we do our procurement of projects, the way whatever we get from the procuring entities, like I said earlier, I said with the ability to look at the lowest standard is not assisting us in any way. It's rather bringing us into a big problem. So those are the things that we have to go to and try to close the loops in. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. Thank you, Hao.
Yeah.
You know, the discussion or the issues so far have essentially come out of focusing on construction. So focusing on the stage of work, which is possibly just after tender, contractors had maybe started on site, or if it's maintenance projects, you know, contractors and subcontractors were already on site, starting with maintenance work. But everything prior to this seems to have ground to a halt. Gaborone City Council is not receiving building applications. You know, clients are saying, stop with my design work. The uncertainty that COVID-19 has brought into any kind of future planning or any kind of, you know, pre-contract stage of a project, for me is quite distressing. So I'm going to ask Kgafela to talk a little bit about, respond a little bit to what do we do when it comes to things that really, if we are resilient as we want to be, what do we need to be doing in the future to address some of those concerns, particularly about pre-contract stages. Kgafela.
Thank you very much, Sita. Thanks for having me back in the room. I just want to go back to my slides so that I can better answer these questions that have been brought forward. Can you hear me on your side? Okay. So hello, can you hear me? All
yes.
right. Okay, I understand you hear me now. Sorry, for a while there I couldn't hear anything. But anyway, I just want to answer and perhaps just bring in the thread of what it is that we've been discussing and take it forward in terms of where are we going now as a nation, as an industry. So my colleagues already have touched on these issues of complexity, issues of the fact that we have multiple dependencies. Kwakwa has just spoken to that. The fact that we're importing materials and skilled labor. And then in terms of ambiguity, which I had mentioned earlier, Mekeli has also spoken about these multiple interpretations of contracts and the fact that the government relief efforts have focused on reducing the risk to unemployment as opposed to reducing risk to collapse of business. So the construction sector is capital intensive, as we all know. We need to resuscitate it, and that will depend on the recovery of the economy in general. So there's three drivers that I've looked at in terms of drivers of the economy. And for me, I believe that to manage risk, all of these drivers, being the individual themselves, the businesses, government, we need to manage risk by being fluid, being adaptable to the situation. So what does adaptability mean to these different aspects that drive the economy? When we speak to the government itself, we're looking at the shocks that are taking place, and the shocks become things like the economic and business collapse. Obviously, when that happens, we are looking at unemployment, we are looking at inadequate project financing. Somebody has mentioned in one of the questions, can we talk about financing? Where is the money going to come from to get projects going, to get the economy moving? The failure to implement projects, for example, that are already on site or that are sitting at the tables of the planners, and then litigation again. So how do we mitigate this going forward? The first question is to ask yourself, are we technologically prepared? As a government, do we see government civil servants, are they working from home in as much as the private sector is working from home? And therefore, are we adaptive? Is government adaptive in terms of your processes, your technology in place, your workflows? Are you dealing with them to allow the civil servants to work from home? Standardization, the multiple contracts that we're talking about, is it working for us? Do we have clear processes in place? And therefore, we need to maybe hone in into what is it that works for our particular country, what works for our industry. Do we standardize our contracts to make sure that we're not dealing with multiple types of contracts within the same environment? And then also the fact of listening to the pulse of industry. Government should be listening and being inclusive, looking at your stakeholders, engaging them to come up with the best of solutions, and then exploring different options of financing. The P model, which is currently just coming in trickle. Maybe government needs to look further into that, engaging more private sector through P. At the same time, ensuring that, of course, citizen empowerment is taken into consideration. The same thing, we speak about businesses. Look at your stakeholders. Look at the people that you're engaging with and your processes. We're going to be seeing a lot of cash flow interruptions. It's already happening. Bankruptcy litigation, again, repeated, and then workflow interruption. How do we mitigate all of this? Is for businesses do we specialize or do we become generalist? The fact is that when we talk about adaptability, when we talk about being fluid, you need to have a multi-talented team that is able to adapt to whatever different needs that come your way. Be technologically prepared. And having adequate insurance in place. Again, there's a question that was asked earlier. All these three aspects, government, business, individual, you need to look at insurances that are in place. You need to look at engaging your insurers to let them know how you are working, how you are functioning, to ensure that it goes in line with what your insurance policy says, or if there's a need to alter it, that you are taking that into consideration. And then being aware of regulatory changes as a business, letting technology enable your business to continue existing. As an individual, I want us to look at the fact that as an individual, you are a small part of a bigger organism that drives the economy. You might be facing redundancy or layoffs. Your income might be reduced. You might not be coping in a new work environment, or health and safety issues, going to site, having to go to site when maybe we are not yet on the clear. Issues of bankruptcy. How do we look at going forward? Number one, again, we go back to fluidity. As an individual, are you fluid? Are you adaptive? Do you have skills that are transferable from one environment to another? Skills, for example, such as project management. You are able to apply them in different environments at different levels of the project development cycle, as well as even outside the construction industry. Are you upskilling yourself? How are you able to go from who you are now or who you were before COVID-19? Who are you going to be after COVID-19 and going forward? Do you have insurances in place, and what does your plan B look like? You've got to look at your plan B, that if this does not work out, what am I doing about my life to make me more relevant in the future? So the question is, how prepared were we as a people, as a nation? Our data is showing us here that working from home, we are working from home, but are we coping? Most of us are somewhat coping or not coping. It's not that bad, but we should be saying we're coping. We should be prepared. You look at firm preparedness, A lot of our respondents said they were somewhat prepared or not prepared. But again, we need to be proactive as opposed to reactive. And then COVID-19 service provision. We're finding that a lot of firms are currently saying they're actually not involved in any COVID-19 service provision. But this is the question that comes in terms of, is government actually engaged in private sector to come up with solutions? So going forward, are we going to see a government that is inclusive, that is engaging with private sector to help it come up with solutions? Revenue losses, if the lockdown is extended to May, there's a lot of uncertainty. A lot of firms are reporting that they will obviously experience between 25 to 50% loss in revenue. Those are far-reaching consequences. I just took a few comments from our survey just to say these are the lessons that we might have learned, and perhaps going from here, again, what do we think of? Number one is to activate projects that relieve government of direct monetary relief. I spoke earlier about triple Ps, and also the fact that for as long as a project is at hand and people are working, there'll be less of a need to rely on something like a wage relief. There'll be less of a cry from the business community to say, help us with rental. For as long as I have a project, I have an income, and therefore I can meet my obligations. Again, streamlining and digitizing things like your project implementation processes, such as planning and building approvals and procurement. Currently, as Mesita has mentioned, nothing is going through at the City Council. Projects are not being perused, neither can projects be submitted for perusal. So it is time to digitize all of these processes, as well as including even your tendering processes, your procurement processes. I spoke about stakeholder consultation and engagement, the fact that we are interdependent and our successes depend on one another. It's something that I mentioned when we started on this presentation. Strengthening regulatory bodies for intelligent, informed guidance. I want to link that with investing in R&D. Without research, without data, trust me, we cannot make decisions that are really pointing to solving the problems that we have. So we need to take research and we need to take research and development very seriously as a people, as a nation, and then designing innovation is going to be required. Designing new spaces. What kind of new spaces? Refurbishing in order to react to such health pandemics, in order to just make sure that in the future we are better prepared to, if we need to increase the sizes of our hospitals, if we need to increase or to modify the spaces that we have. Designing spaces that are able to be modified easily. And then utilizing mechanisms that are in place to fast-track project implementation. Such mechanisms as the Project Allocation Committee, which is the Ministry of Housing, just to share a few of what our members said. I've extracted those from what the research said. Thank you, Sita. I hope I have to an extent answered the question.
Yes, thanks for that, Kgafela. I thought we would now go through our questions that have come through the platform. Some of the questions are very specific, and to those questions I would say to the authors that there is ample opportunity to engage in the wealth of knowledge at the very minimum from these women, so the women that are sitting around this panel with me. So for some of the very specific questions, yes, the ladies will be here and are available to assist you professionally. The first one that comes to mind is, the FIDIC, BIDP, JBCC contracts. What other contracts are there? It's a very specific question, but to me it raises the question really to say, as a country with its own very specific construction and building environment that is perhaps similar to South Africa and similar to other parts of the world, Kelly, is this not time that we had our own standard forms of building contracts that are relevant to Botswana? What are your thoughts on that question? Oh, unmute your mic.
Yes, I just did. Thank you, Sita. I think it's time for the industry to look at that question because we have our unique set of circumstances that affect us as an industry and, you know, as a country. I mean, the fact of our land, well, us being landlocked, for instance, and currently not having access to, you know, the supply chain outside this country because we are not, you know, self-sustaining. We have to look at all of these factors and make sure that we develop even contracts that suit our unique circumstances that are developed by local experts that understand the local environment. Because, for instance, with lawyers, there's only limited access to lawyers that are from South Africa that are normally engaged you know, in this industry. So we have to look at all of these factors and self-interest as an industry and make sure that we customize even the contracts to suit our own experiences. So this is a lesson that, you know, going forward, you know, we can take and evaluate even those standard forms of contract and suit them to ourselves.
Thank you. Kidi, this next question is really directed at you. The question is, like, in terms of construction market activity and as quantity surveyors, what are we predicting in terms of tender inflation and deflation and market indices? For me, it also needs to be a broader question. You know, there has been a lot of discussion in our society about industry, people supporting each other, not being speculative, not looking at the situation as an opportunity to find loopholes and make money. What do we see as not only the actual financial implications, but what are issues that need to change within financial ethics going forward, especially founded in our building contracts? Do we see an opportunity to, how can I put it, to bring some values of Botho into the way that we do things, to avoid non-conflict situations, but also have a real recognition of actual financial implications of what we do?
That's very true, Sita, because, you know, obviously this will depend on the type of contract that one has signed. Because yes, there will be cost implications here and there, but it's not for people now to take advantage of the situation and say, just because you know, the contract was suspended for a certain period, then obviously a lot of things have changed. Yes, we are going to see price increases, which cannot really be avoided, because if suppliers decide to increase the prices, obviously it's going to have an impact on the overall project cost at the end of the day. But it's not for us to take advantage of that. So that discussion still needs to be had to be had with together the employers, the consultants, together with the contractors, to see how best the impact can be lessened. So it's not just about increasing cost, it's also about looking at other things as well. So even as contractors, it's not about just saying, you know what, the material prices have gone up. What is it that you can do as a contractor also to control the increase of costs? And then, you know, Sita, I just wanted to go back, because there was that question which talks to forms of contracts, because the question there was, there's this FIDIC, BID, PJ, JBCC, what other forms of contracts are used? You know, in the Botswana context, we have the government form of contract, which is the white form, which the government developed specifically for the construction industry. It's currently being used together with the FIDIC. And then also we have the NEC, which is mainly used in the UK. And then, you know, you still have bespoke contracts which other employers use, which are specific to their projects. So there are so many other different forms of contracts that are being used out there. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Kgafela, you wanted to comment on the same question? If you unmute your mic.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to say in terms of, again, linking it back to what Hao had mentioned, the fact that we have for a long time relied on what we refer to as the low-cost method in our procurement process. It's going to be a very interesting time, and I think a critical time to relook this issue of lowest cost preference. Why? Because if you get into a position where people are desperate for work, we are basically, I believe, going to see more undercutting of costs of construction, which in the end often catches up with the client. At the end of the day, you find that you then get more and more claims along the way of a project, and eventually the cost is even more than what it should have been. So it's going to be important, as the question has been posed, to have a very documented or researched index that is going to assist quantity surveyors and cost consultants to give a realistic picture of what projects should be costing. And again, for the stakeholders, being government mostly and private sector, to understand the losses that can come with just believing that a project can be built for a small amount, when in fact the reality is not the case. Thank you.
Absolutely. Mayor Kelly also wanted, I think, to comment on this issue. I'll give her an opportunity to say something.
Where have I gone now? Okay.
Yep, you're back on.
I wanted to comment on the issue of price increases. I just wanted to highlight that even in a force majeure situation, the affected party has a duty to mitigate their costs. So you can't just sit back and, you know, not find ways of, you know, mitigating the costs and just say, you know, it was, you know, a force majeure situation. There was nothing I could do. We all have a duty to find ways to get around this situation in everybody's best interests.
Fantastic. Then, thank you for that. There are two questions which I feel as if Mayor Kgafela has essentially addressed them already. The working from home issue, but there's a follow-up question from Re Gaupataki to say, you know, there is software, there is technology that enables us to work more collaboratively within the built environment. So can we, Kgafela, can we comment on this, but also the impact that this has as a means to improve the quality of the deliverables that we give to our clients? Are there not opportunities to bring technology in and allow technology to let us grow?
Absolutely, absolutely, Sita. As I mentioned earlier, this is a time that we are being given the opportunity to utilize technology to itself. If you have been drawing on 2 dimensions, used to just your AutoCAD, this is the time when you have to rethink, how do I upskill myself? The past 3 weeks, actually, I've been hoping that as people are sitting at home, they are finding more time to actually take up some of these free courses that are there online. Obviously, when we talk about BIM, that is high-end technology. We are going to be talking about artificial intelligence in a very short time to come. And again, fluidity, being able to adapt to changing situations is all about upscaling yourself. It's all about being at the forefront of technology, using it to better yourself and what it is that you deliver to your client. Thank you.
Yeah, then there's a question here about, let's imagine the worst case scenario that, you know, a week from now, our numbers suddenly change, and that horrific change forces the formal lockdown to be extended. this would, you know, go beyond crippling our economy in a much worse way than it has at the moment. So how do we already now see strategies that have to do with enabling, for example, construction sites to come back online, even with, you know, extreme social distancing in place? Do we see that as being a possibility? I would, you know, would anyone like to take up a response to that question? You'll just unmute. Kgafela?
Oh gosh, what have I done? Do you hear me?
Unmuted. We can hear you now.
I've like zoomed into you on my screen, but I don't know. Anyway, I was saying that, of course, technology is out there. Anytime that you think of something that is possible, my finding throughout life has been that somebody has done it, it's out there. We have software that allows us to share drawings, for example. Talking about BIM earlier, we've got software that allows us to work collaboratively, to link mechanical drawings to structural, to electrical, ensuring that there's no conflict in the design. So we even have locally, I'm just going to mention, there's a certain company that is doing, it's sort of like a virtual site visit, where you're able to go to a site and have a look around, and without being there, somebody else, one person could go to site, take all of these 3D images, and you are able to assess, even as a quantity surveyor, for example, the progress of the work. As an architect, the quality of work that has been produced. So the technology is out there. We must use it to the best that we can. Thank you.
And I look at, and I mean, that comment addresses a couple of the other questions that, you know, going forward, we see a need to not only improve and empower what SHE officers on site do, but to start developing. And I mean, today it's the COVID-19, tomorrow it's another illness, or it's another disease, or it's another pandemic. So as far, you know, in my personal experience, the safety and health officers on sites really struggle. You know, clients are really unwilling to fund the presence of a safety and health officer on site. Often, you know, SHE officers, contractors dislike having a client appointed SHE officer monitoring them on site. But I think for me, this shows us that there needs to be a real culture change in terms of recognizing that particular role as a key role in protecting the robustness and the resilience within our construction industry. I don't know if anyone wants to speak to that in particular. Michal? You have to unmute your mic.
Oh, okay, thank you. I was going to speak from a different dimension now with regards to the opportunity that would be realized on the energy aspect of things. Because in this case, there's going to be, we're not going to use a lot of paper. We'd be using a lot of technology to communicate, like sharing drawings is going to be on electronically. And as such, that would give us an opportunity to save on a lot of paper that is currently being used in terms of sharing hard copies, including paper that is being used in terms of sharing just information, in like faxes and all those other paperwork. And all those things are not in line with what the green technology would prefer in terms of you know, going green. And as a country, we know that we also have obligations to go green. And yeah, I'm seeing an opportunity there, so that in future, even if we continue doing meetings like this, it saves time for project officers. It saves petrol also, which is also a green issue. And then it even just moving around the city. It's issues which are also not being supported by green technology. So I see an opportunity in terms of the green technology there. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Absolutely. Mayor Kgafela, you wanted to comment?
I wanted to just comment on your question with regards to She Matters on site. And I wanted to link that to the question that has been asked by Sithabile, which is speaking to the risk in terms of who is the mandated custodian of risk management on site. I think, again, this experience is teaching us something. For the longest time, we've had she officers or she managers being under the employ of contractors, which brings in the issue of accountability. A lot of us have been to site and found that the she managers are actually unable to disclose serious matters that are happening on site. So this is the time to say, let us take safety, health, and the environment very seriously. Remove it from the responsibility of the contractor. Make it independent even from consultants, so that a she person on site is really ensuring that everybody on site is going along with what needs to be done. I think that is one of the things that as we open up going forward, as government opens up the different industries, that matters like this need to be taken in place in terms of how is government going to be sure that when they open a site, indeed there's compliance that is taking place. This also goes to risk management. Risk management on site is usually either the duty of a project manager, or it is the duty of the architect if they are employed as within the duties of project management. But again, it needs to be an independent aspect of when we run projects, that we have risk managers who are independent from consultants, independent from the contractor, so that the client again is able to get reporting that is as true to its sense as it can get.
Yeah. Thank you. So there are two questions here that actually, in my view, have been responded to by Mechao in terms of supply chain and materials. I'll touch on them just to give her an opportunity to re-emphasize. Somebody has says, what do you mean by a resilient supply chain? For me, this is a key issue. We have a key issue to speak to. We have issues of citizen empowerment policies that are coming on board. We have seen how vulnerable we are. I mean, we're vulnerable in terms of food. That's, you know, an immediate need, but in the long term, we are vulnerable in terms of very many things. So yes, this is an opportunity to look at a resilient supply chain. So Mechao, if you could maybe speak to what we see as the components that are required for a resilient supply chain, you know, what are required in terms of investment, changes in procurement policies, those kind of issues related to getting people to understand what a resilient supply chain is locally for us.
Okay. Like I said, we need to plan for the next supply chain disruption by building a resilient supply chain. When we look at the way we operate, I will only talk about mechanical equipment because that's my area of specialty, whereby contractors and agents locally, they experience a lot of problems, like I said, because of the seesaw issues which are happening in construction industry. Tomorrow the construction industry is up. The other day the construction industry is down. And then because most of this equipment is not manufactured locally, and we have to depend on the collaboration between the agent locally and the overseas and their overseas counterparts or manufacturers. So basically, if the contractors here are not getting the support, or the tap opens, like somebody said in another way, in terms of projects, where the market is flooded with projects and it looks like people are getting jobs, and the agent who are working with the manufacturers outside the country, their future looks like there's going to be something for them. But then on another hand, or in time, the project has stopped, or the project has suspended. There's nothing for these people who are locally. Even when they try to collaborate, there are no orders coming from Botswana because the project have been like instantly cancelled. These people lose, this agent and suppliers who are collaborating on our behalf with other suppliers outside the country, they lose that relationship. So that relationship has to be, it can only be strengthened by availability of projects in the country. So sometimes we realize a situation whereby contractors literally don't have anything here to order from this very end. So that, as I say, it kills the relationship, it kills the supply chain. And I also said, because of most of the manufacturers, they get orders from all over the world. They will start to prioritize, and they won't give us as a country priority, or our agent who are ordering material for our country priorities to be able to order, and they might even push their orders aside, and their orders won't be priority. I mean, we have to take into account the fact that we are also, like, as I said, only 2 million, and then our projects are not as many as projects which are coming from South Africa, or maybe even Nigeria, or maybe even from Europe or from Britain. So our orders are so limited, and with instant interruptions, tomorrow the contractor can have a relationship with the supplier, and then on another end, that relationship gets disrupted because there's nothing which is happening in the market. It's a problem for us. So all the stakeholders being led by the government, we have to support even the agents who are supplying the materials so that they can have that strong relationship with the suppliers outside the country. So basically, I'm talking to everybody, all people who are involved in the construction industry, starting from the procuring entities, the government, and the construction, the contractors, the consultants, to be able to have access to this supply chain, to be able to talk to this supply chain, and be able to get support, especially if the government can just cancel projects without due regard that there are some people who have made relationships on the basis that they are running businesses locally, which is going to benefit the government in the future, and then we just cancel projects like that. It becomes a problem, and the supply chain is disrupted in a big way. Thank you, Madam Chair. There was also a question or a comment with regards to whether shortage of materials can be a cause for extension of time as a result of the COVID-19. Because usually it is understood that the contractor is resourced enough and has built relationships so that he can be able to get materials from their suppliers, wherever they are getting materials from. But now we are also saying there's going to be bottlenecks which are going to be realized due to issues of COVID-19. I think those are contract issues. Like Edie can assist me with that one. Okay. Thank you.
So before we head, there are a lot of questions both in the chat and in the question and answer section related to contracts that are quite specific, and I think in order to answer them responsibly, you would need to know the whole context around, you know, what the actual concern is. So I'll come back to those in a moment. one of the key issues that I feel as panelists and also for our audience that is listening, that we haven't spoken about. We have spoken about very formal contracts. We've spoken about a contracting format that speaks to possibly medium to large scale established contracting entities that are registered as companies that has, we have a huge informal sector in the construction industry that is unaccounted for. There are very many craftsmen and women who are tilers, who are big bricklayers, who are not engaged in formal working contracts, who are self-employed in a way. As an industry, what are we going to do going forward to try and bring these people in the fold? Because they form part of the informal sector of our business, of our industry, that I feel this current pandemic has really exposed the vulnerability of those people. If I can use a personal example, for some of my smaller projects, where somebody just needs a boundary wall repaired or something. Yes, I know a bricklayer, everybody knows a guy, but all of these people are now calling to say, hey, mama, hey, it is revealing that vulnerability. From all of your different professional perspectives, what is it that we need to do going forward to also take cognizance of this segment of our industry and ensure that that segment of our industry is protected as much as the rest of us are in our formal environments? I don't know who would like to go first to respond to that. Kgafela.
Thank you, Sita. As I always say, we are better counted when we associate. The minute that we exist separately in our own little corners, we are learning now that it's difficult for government to even react to the informal sector because we don't have mechanisms in place for finding who is where, who was doing what, how is so-and-so suffering. So the first thing that needs to happen, I think, is the actual implementation and legislation of the Construction Industry Authority, which I understand has been sitting at the Attorney General for some time now. It needs to be, number one, I think we need to draw it back and have a look at what is contained in that Construction Industry Authority mandate to ensure that it is encompassing the registration of all trades. For example, your plumbers, your people who are supplying sand to building sites. We know that a lot of our construction industry right now, as we are rightfully saying, consists of your small residential clients. We need a national housing building council, for example, that can function to ensure that the small family residential houses clients actually have a place to go to when they are aggrieved. These are authorities that in some way can also avail funding for times like this through some kind of levy that is paid by those that are registered, those that belong there. So it's about associating, it's about registering, it's about regulating. We have seen this happen in the last few years with our own industries, the quantity surveyors, the architects, the engineers. The minute that we were able to be self-regulated, we're able to now attend to issues and actually have a webinar seminar today. If we didn't, then we would not be here having a conversation of how to make the country better economically. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to add to the issue of what we do with our small, Chanda?
Okay, thank you. So now I'm going to be talking from the training head. Gorata talked extensively about upskill. Now, a lot of the from my experience, what I've observed, we've seen people who used to own construction companies unskilled, and as you mentioned right now, artisans. Perhaps the person was a tiler, a painter, or a bricklayer, or one of those part of our value chain and our ecosystem. Now, it is upon us, and this is, when I talk about training, we should come together as an industry and ensure that there are programs in place to formally train some of these people. Right now, one of the key things that government talks to is a knowledge-based economy. A time will come where we need to perhaps now start exporting skill. Are people skilled enough? Why are people skilled enough? What are we doing right now? The 100 and something people who are sitting in this, or who are in this webinar, some of them skilled up to PhD level, master's level, degree level, to develop programs that can upskill. Whether we're participating with the University of Botswana or other training institutions such as Minnacle Academy, to ensure that there are programs in place to help upskill this crop. It humbles me at times. I receive students who come, or rather learners who come from construction companies. You get a construction company saying, would like to formally train this person as a facilities manager, would like you to take them through a certificate program in facilities management. And you can see there that there's a deliberate program in place in that particular entity to ensure that they're developing their people, to make them resilient. Because what we're going to be seeing sooner or later is that some of these people who are unskilled are going to be fallen by the wayside. Some of these people who are unskilled or not formally trained, or whether their skills are limited, they work for 10 years, 20 years. Beyond that, they fall by the wayside. So that is my contribution to that particular subject matter.
Thank you, ladies. Yeah, I think the biggest revelation, not just for me as a panelist, but also in terms of receiving the questions that we are receiving both in the chat and in the formal question and answer forum, is that this was an introduction. The issues we are facing have unearthed a whole series of problems, but also in my view, it has also unearthed a whole series of opportunities. Before you are a group of women with qualifications from different industries beyond the 6-7 of us who are sitting here as part of this webinar. There is a whole industry of registered, skilled, and able professionals across the country. I truly believe that if we combine our efforts, if we work collaboratively, if we understand that, if you walk alone, you can walk very fast, but if you want to go far, you should not walk alone. I want to take this opportunity to say to everybody, thank you very much for attending today's session, but also to say that this session tells us that we need to have a further conversation about more of these issues, and to have a further conversation in more detail. So you will be hearing from women in the built environment in terms of our next webinar and the content of the subjects for that webinar. I'm going to give my panelists about a minute each to talk to you about maybe what their biggest takeaway is from the questions that we're getting. And, I call it the elevator pitch. You walk into the elevator and, that person who has key influence in achieving what you want to achieve, what would you tell them in the 1 minute that the elevator is taking you from the ground floor to the top as a takeaway from today's session? Who would like to go first?
I'll go first, Sita. For me, it's quite refreshing and also interesting to see that a lot of people indeed are interested in what's happening around them, and also they are concerned in terms of what is going to happen in future, especially in the within the built environment. So it's not like everybody's on holiday, as it may seem, but people are thinking about this and also giving it a lot of thought about what's going to happen in future. And also it will be interesting also for the next webinar the issues that we'll discuss in the next session, and also how our participants view those as well. Thank you.
Kelly, you want to go next? You need to unmute.
Oh. Okay, is it okay? Can you hear me?
We can hear
yes.
you. Please go ahead.
Yes, contract management is key. Review your contract, look at your variation clauses, and customize the contract to your experiences and your outcomes as best as you can. If you don't have a contract, you can get a formal contract, and you would actually benefit from crafting a contract that takes the current circumstances into account. And remember, your failure to perform has to be directly linked. If you say to COVID, it has to be directly linked to COVID. So for force majeure, impossibility of performance, always remember that there has to be a causal link between your failure to perform and the lockdown. If you allege lockdown, if it was before lockdown, but Corona was there, if it affected you, you have to show a direct link between your failure and whatever it is you allege led you to fail to perform. So in closing, check your attorneys.
Fantastic. Minnacle, some closing words from you. You need to unmute your mic.
From my side, going back to the supply chains, I believe that what I've taken from this discussion is the fact that, as some other panelists have already said, there's going to be some overall costs of construction, which is expected from other contractors. But like Kidi has said, it's not automatic because everybody has responsibilities. So basically, I believe we should start engaging all parties concerned in the construction industry as early as possible. That is, we shouldn't let the contractor alone be responsible for procuring the materials there, while we have no interest in where the contractors are getting their materials. So basically, they should also conclude subcontractors and suppliers should be involved early in the project as is necessary. Gorata has talked to issues of coming to change even the way we traditionally carry out our projects. And I think this is one of the areas where we need to try and tweak our regulations a bit, so that early involvement would also encourage integration, which would enable suppliers to be service providers as opposed to providers of products. Because usually in our traditional way of doing business or of consulting and contracting in the country, the suppliers, they become just providers of products. They're not part of the service provision. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Minnacle. Chanda?
Thank you, Sita. I think for me, really, one of the key things I've learned over the past 2 years is that collaboration is key. I really want to thank the women in the built environment in this country, Botswana Women in Construction Association, the women sitting here, yourself, the Architectural Registration Council, AAB, the engineers, the quantity surveyors, QSRC, and I'm glad you are all in the screen, so it's easy for me to recall. And it's really this. This is testament to, the webinar is testament to the coming together of women who want change in this country. And I'd like to implore us to keep going, to keep motivating, because it is upon us to ensure that we effect the change that we desire. Now, once more, as Minnacle Academy, I'd like to invite all the people here, attendees, more than 100 attendees here, and the professionals in this industry. It is upon us to change this industry. We would like to collaborate where possible in whichever way. Our core business is really upskill. So where somebody can input in terms of developing any sort of program that can upskill any person in this industry, right from the planner or the person who conceives the idea of a building to the very last person who demolishes that building. Kwakwa right now is talking about, you know, our suppliers and how we take them lightly, and yet they're part of the value chain. So the whole value chain, even including bringing in lawyers who are partaking in, you know, drafting our contracts, etc. Every single person who's part of this value chain. I'd like us to come together to develop and ensure that we work on upskill of this particular sector. Thank you very much, Ms.
Thank you, Kgafela. Again, unmute your mic.
Unmute my mic. Okay, it's unmuted. Thank you, Sita. I think all the ladies have basically taken my words. We are very grateful to be part of this, I think, formative event, as I call it. This is the first of its kind, and it's been organized by women, specifically led by Chanda. We are very grateful for this. Key takeaway for me today, and my advice to everybody is, when we talk about managing risk and being able to come out of a situation better, no matter how bad it was, is to be resilient, to be fluid and adaptive. And therefore, as government, as individuals, as business, we need to look at strategies that allow us to reassign our resources, for example, to react to different conditions that we find ourselves in. We have talked about inclusivity, for example, the leaning on one another when we make decisions. I want to implore our fraternity across the board in the construction industry to say, if you are not in places of policy making, somebody else is always going to be making decisions for you. So perhaps we need to upskill ourselves to move into that environment of policy making. As architects, do we all have to be sitting behind our computers, as I always say, drawing buildings? Or can we encourage our younger professionals to say, look into also going into policy making, so that we know that at Ministry of Investment, at Ministry of Infrastructure, everywhere we know we are represented by somebody who understands the built environment and construction to be able to be effective, as well as investing in research and development. That is key. For example, for as long as we don't put money in R&D as a country, we can never get anywhere. We need data, we need research that can teach us how to move forward as a people, to be better informed. Thank you.
Well, ladies, on that note, and our attendees who are watching today's session, I'd really like to take this opportunity to say thank you for your time. Thank you for your input. The questions are interrogative and raising new issues. And as we did say, we will respond to all the questions either by email and share those responses across the platform. There are questions that require professional help. You have at least 6 people here that you can approach professionally. Let us support each other through this process. Let us use this as a wonderful opportunity to actually grow as a nation, to empower ourselves, to empower those around us, and to empower those that are unable to empower themselves. I'd like to, again, thank you very much to Women in the Built Environment, Minnacle Properties, and to Botswana Women in Construction for today's session. You will be hearing from us. Today is it's just the tip of the iceberg, where we've unwrapped the first layer. There are many, many more layers to come. And this has given us an opportunity to reach more of you and to share many of the concerns that we have within the built environment. And I think together we'll be able to find sustainable solutions for this. Thank you for your time.